All right, here's how I'm interpreting Nagel so far. Nagel claims that we take our lives seriously. I'm not sure that everyone takes their lives seriously, but at least some of us take our lives seriously. So I'm going to go along with Nagel that far. Okay, so that's the first thing. At least some of us are serious about our lives. I'm pretty sure that's true. And then the second part of this is the second part of this is the idea that our life plans are plans for our lives, our goals, our sets of goals and policies and stuff, have no fundamental justification. Oops. Get my notes here. So there's 2 points here, 2 questions about this. Write them in red. One question is, what is seriousness? What does it mean to take life seriously? The second question, I want to do that in red too. What is lack of justification? What's the point, or what does it mean to say that there's no point? If I say there's no point, if I say there's no justification, what does that mean? What are we lacking? What is not there? Now, I'm going to discuss justification first. Okay. Right. So this is a problem. Nagel thinks that this is a problem because we take our lives seriously, but there's no justification for that. That seems to be the thing, is that if we step back on our lives, and you remember all the discussions we had about the meaning of life, when everybody was talking about the meaning of life, what sort of thing, the whole Nozick paper, all the things that could give life meaning that turn out not to. There's the idea that so So the idea that this contradiction makes life pointless. We're taking everything seriously, but what was it all for? Have you ever seen that in literature, in stories? Somebody at the end of their life reflects about everything and looks back at everything they did, and then they say, but what was it all for? Why did I do all that stuff? I look back and it achieved nothing. It was all point. Never seen a show like that. I must watch real TV. The idea of, oh my God, realize that I've been really, really serious about this thing for years, and it really didn't matter. I don't recall any specific examples, but there are certain things I had to do in my life that I would do in a very complicated way, because that's how I thought, or I'd take a particular route to work. I remember doing that for years. I took the 22 freeway and then Valley View to go to Cypress College from where I live. And I remember one day I Googled it. I used the Google Maps, and Google Maps said, don't take the 22. Google Maps just went straight up the 5 and along the 91 and then down. And I started taking that route, and it was about 10 minutes shorter. And I can't remember specific examples, but I know there have been a number of times in my life that I was doing something for years in a pretty complicated way, and then I look at it again, and also I talk to someone who's doing the same thing but in a different way, and it's like, well, that's much easier than what I do. And so all of this stuff that I was doing at the time was pointless, right? You add up all the those 10-minute segments that I wasted, all the times I drove, hundreds of times I drove to Cypress College from Santa Ana, and take the wrong, go the long way. Oh my God, it's pointless, right? So what if the whole of life is like that? Oh my God, it's pointless. So you look back at it and go, oh, why did I do that? So Nagel says we're really, really serious about our lives. We're really, really serious about accomplishing stuff. But there turns out to be no fundamental justification. That, right. So, and here's what I think is Nagel's kind of argument for why stuff is not justified, or why there's this justification problem. Y is justified by X. X is justified by B. B is justified by... So here's the problem in one sense. When we talk about justifications, we say one thing is justified by another thing. One enterprise is carried out to gain something. And if we're saying, well, we do Y to get X, and we want X because it gets us V, and if V gets us, where does it end? Right? It turns into this style of justification, saying this thing has to be justified because of this, turns into an infinite regress. Someone have a copy of the book? I left my book at home. All right, thank you. Oh, you highlighted bits. That's good. I'll follow your highlighting. Right. So, we cannot live human lives without energy and attention, nor without making choices which show that we take some things more seriously than others. But we always have available a point of view outside the particular form of our lives from which the seriousness appears gratuitous. These two inescapable viewpoints collide in us, and that is what makes life absurd. It is absurd because we ignore the doubts we know cannot be settled, continuing to live with nearly undiminished seriousness in spite of them. That's what Nagel says. We step back, change it to now. There's a response to this, right? Think about the last really good weekend you had, or the last event that you looked forward to, an event that you had, that you planned for, that you maybe you helped arrange. I've got a costume dinner coming up this weekend. I'm very looking forward to. I'm involved in science fiction and anime conventions, and I enjoy them. Usually I enjoy them tremendously. I helped put on a play a few months ago. Right? Do we do things like that? Do we do things like that to accomplish something else? Or do we do them to do them? And when we look back on it, it's like, well, that's over. Maybe I'll do it again. Maybe I'll never do it again. One thing I did a long time ago was I participated in an ROTC officers basic camp. I was an officer cadet for a while at Fort Knox, Kentucky. Glad I did it. I look back at it. I value the memories. Not going to do it again. So sometimes, does this make sense? Sometimes chains of justification come to an end. There's some things we do just to do them. I gave $2 to a panhandler today. He was very polite. He came up, introduced himself fairly politely, explained what he wanted to do with the money. He needed money for a burrito at the Mexican fast food joint next to the gas station. I gave him a couple of bucks, and we had a little bit of a conversation. This interaction is not going to help my career. I had no idea that I'd even use it as an example in class. I mean, I got that value out of it, but right, it still cost me $2. I could get a cup of coffee with that. But it was worth it to do that thing, to have that little bit of human interaction, to talk to someone. It's quite the best dressed panhandler I've ever seen. And he was very polite and nice, and we talked about my hat and various things. Made a little bit of small talk. It sort of brightened my day. And I look back at it and say, okay, yeah. And then the big things I do, the play, the costume dinner, running a registration department for a convention. I look back at those and go, yeah, I did that. I did that because I wanted to do that. The only benefit it gives me is that I can look back on it and say that was something I achieved that I wanted to achieve and that I enjoyed doing. So, chains of justification do end. they end in an achievement. And some achievements are intermediate, right? We celebrate high school graduation because it signals, at least in some way, it signals capacity for managing adult life. It's a sort of rite of passage. We celebrate college graduation because it's not just it's an achieving an education, but it's also more money, better chance of a good life afterwards, right? Some things most people go to college to get the kind of education that will enable them to make more money, I would think. Am I wrong about that? No, okay, good. But there are some goals that are just done for them. Now Nagel says, oops, okay, I can't lecture anymore, I've run out of space. Okay, so there's this system of goals and justifications so there's a system of goals and justifications. And Nagel says, thanks Hilda, Nagel says, we step back to find that the whole system of justification and criticism, which controls our choices and supports our claims to rationality, rests on responses and habits that we never question, that we should not know how to defend without circularity, and to which we shall continue to adhere even after they're called into question. Okay, so our justification, oops, I left the word out. Our justification system supports our claim to rationality. What does it mean to make a claim of rationality? Well, have you ever been walking around out in the world and you come across somebody doing something that seems to make no sense? Right? People are doing something, somebody's digging a hole and then another hole, or digging one hole and putting the dirt into a hole he's already dug, walking around in strange clothes. I saw a guy in a spacesuit once. I was at Savers, there was a thrift store in Anaheim, and a guy was walking out wearing an orange space shuttle style spacesuit. Didn't have the helmet, but he had the helmet attachment ring around his neck, and I don't think he was wearing but he was walking like that. I'm like, what the hell? And I should have gone up and said, dude, why the spacesuit? We sometimes see people doing stuff, and it makes no sense to us, and we ask, and we find out it actually does make sense, that they're doing something that fits into our form of life. Right? We have a whole form of life. Have you ever gone to a different country and seen people doing their folk dances or national costumes or getting drunk in an interesting way, and like, what the heck, what is this? And then you ask and you find, well, it's okay, this fits into their culture, they have certain beliefs and things that they adhere to, and that this fits with what they do. And then sometimes we see people doing stuff that actually doesn't make any sense, that when we press, when we ask, no good reason comes out. Right? And we think of people who wear tinfoil hats, because the CIA is controlling my thoughts through satellite. Right? So the hat, by the way, is just lined with tinfoil. I should line it with tinfoil, probably. But, like, and that doesn't really fit with our form of life. It doesn't fit with any form of life. And I've known people who made no sense when I talk to them, that I have a conversation with them, and that when you talk to them, you don't get anything like a rational response. They don't respond logically to what you say. And so we say that these people are not rational. Right? You know the difference between a rational, and I sometimes say that somebody is very rational, because that they always understand what's going on and they always have a reason. Right? So we have this idea of rationality, and we can make a claim to rationality. And it's kind of an insult to be called irrational, isn't it? They say, what you do makes no sense. That a person who's irrational is sort of, like a crazy bum or a tweaker or someone who's, just simply not worth talking to. Not necessarily someone, not simply someone who has different beliefs from my own. I know lots of people who believe things that are very different from what I believe, but they're still rational. The ones whose rationality I worry about are the ones who cannot express themselves logically, or don't respond to evidence, or don't respond to what's said to them. So we have our claim to rationality, but our claim to rationality is based on a system of justification. It's based on a system of thinking about stuff. And we go out and we think about stuff all the time. So we have this system, you know about logic and evidence. I teach logic and critical thinking, and I teach inductive reasoning, how to deal with evidence, how a good argument is different from a bad argument. And one thing that's I try to make very clear in my logic classes when I'm talking about, like science, right, or history, or politics, or anything where you're trying to establish facts, is that you never have certainty. Everything is uncertain. You can never be sure that something's true politically. Right? We're talking about the chemical attack in Syria. Right? There was some doubt over whether it happened. That doubt seems to be being dispelled. It seems pretty clear. To me, I'm pretty sure that it actually did happen. But then there's also the claim, well, maybe the Assad forces didn't do it. Maybe the rebels got hold of some chemical weapons. I mean, Al-Qaeda is one of the rebel groups is involved there. Maybe Al-Qaeda got hold of some chemical weapons and used them against another faction in the rebel alliance. Or maybe what my personal theory about how the chemical weapons were used was that some divisional commander, some general in Assad's army who controlled some chemical weapons just said, oh, hey, let's just use them. Went ahead and did it. And Assad's like, Sod, I told you not to do that. So that's a possible, but you're never certain about this stuff, right? And even with the best of you never have absolute certainty. So there's always that sort of uncertainty. But Nagel says that it goes beyond this. You guys know about deductive logic? You know about mathematics, right? Mathematics has no content because mathematics is not about the world, about what exists in the world. It's about what's possible and impossible and what's going to happen. So it's all conditional statements. It says if you take two objects of a certain kind and group them with one more object of the second time, you'll always get three. And that's a logical thing, and the world fits logic, because the logic determines what can and can't happen in the world. So we have this system of deductive logic. Well, the trouble is, right, there's this fellow called Kurt Gödel. The umlaut makes it sort of an sound, I think. Not really sure. I just sort of try and garble the name. Right. So Kurt Gödel. And it's sort of a controversial thing. I'm not sure if I buy it myself, but he has this thing called the incompleteness theorem that says that logic is incomplete. That there are symbolic sentences that are true that can never be proved in any system of whatever system of logic you have. There'll be sentences which are true but which can't be proved. Another way of thinking of it, actually forget Gödel. I got a better example. Now, if you like puzzles, things like Sudoku and other sort of mathematical logic games, you might like symbolic logic. You might want to take a deductive logic class. And if you don't like Sudoku or logic puzzles, you want to stay away from deductive logic classes, because I'm teaching a deductive logic, a symbolic logic class over in Saddleback College, and some of the students hate it. And I've had quite a few drops because some people find deductive logic really horrible. But yeah, I love it myself. Right. But one of the things is there are systems of deductive logic which have certain sets of rules, and that's what I'm teaching. I'm teaching a system with a certain set of rules. It's called, well, it's actually just called sentential logic. I prefer, or first order predicate logic. And it has things like if A, then B, right? A implies B. And then if A implies B and A is true, then B is true. And all these kinds of rules. And it's basically reconciling and evaluating all these different sets of rules and statements and things, and there's lots and lots of symbols, right? It's like math, only harder.
Like algebra, but harder.
Yeah. Well, it's about the same level as algebra. And we use this system called sentential logic. And one thing that could happen in a class like this, right, and we teach the system, right? Oh, well, I'm going to step back. If you ever really want to annoy a math teacher, every so often I'll hear someone talk about mathematical logic, or say logic is a part of math. This is complete rubbish. Math is a part of logic, not the other way around. Math is a consequence of logic. So if you ever really want to annoy, there's a sign-up sheet. If you ever really want to annoy a math teacher, ask him or her, how is math proved? Not how are things proved in math, but how do you prove that math actually works? You know, ever heard of Fermat's last theorem? Yeah, there was about a 20-year period after I heard of Fermat's last theorem. There was about a 30-year period where I would hear about it every so often and we're still trying to prove Fermat's last theorem. And then last year, somebody did it. Actually, 3 groups of mathematicians working independently created the tools to prove Fermat's last theorem. And one guy, and I think it was a small group, got together and they put everything together and they came up with a proof of Fermat's last theorem. And it's something like 3 or 4 books worth of reasoning. It's just a huge, complicated argument involving parts of mathematics that I had never heard of before. And so, right, you have a math teacher and he's telling you that Fermat's last theorem has been solved. Right? And then you ask him, okay, so this was solved by using a proof system, a set of steps that used in mathematical proofs. And he says, right. He says, okay, so how do you prove that that system works? That's the annoying question. How do you prove that the system as a whole works? That it actually does prove things? Now, if he's smart, as most math teachers are, he might say, well, math is proved by logic. Right? We have, I'll say, formal logic. There's this branch of formal logic called set theory, which can be fitted inside sentential logic. They're actually closely related. So if you use set theory, you can prove math. And if you use sentential logic, if you use first order logic, you can prove that set theory is sound and complete, right? So set theory can prove that all of mathematics is sound and complete. Sentential logic, first order logic can prove that all of set theory is sound and complete. What annoying question could you guys ask me now? You could ask, well, but Dr. Young, what proves that first order predicate logic is sound and complete? And I do have an answer for that. And that answer is proved by meta logic, right? There's this form of logic called meta logic, and it involves things called second order predicate logic. So first order logic is proved by second order logic. Now, what's the obvious embarrassing question that you could ask me right now?
How's second order logic proved?
How is second order logic proved? And the answer is, it isn't. We haven't proved second order logic. And according to Kurt Gödel, we can't. We can't prove it. So this is a sort of turtles thing, right? Math is a turtle sitting on the turtle of set theory, sitting on the turtle of first order logic, sitting on the turtle of meta logic, and second order logic. And second order logic is going, trying to stay in the air to hold everything else up. And this is what Nagel is talking about. We have these systems of rationality. We can go out and look at enterprises and things people do and say, that works that makes sense. That kind of enterprise makes sense, and this one doesn't. Right? We can go out and look at something like the Drug Enforcement Administration and say, this is a massive cock-up. This is awful. This is insane. You are not making the world better. You're making it worse. Similar comments might be made about some aspects of the prison system. On the other hand, there are things that do work. The group of scientists, American scientists, has been working in Kazakhstan for 17 years. They worked for 17 years and they finally got finished this year or last year. Kazakhstan was the Soviet Union's nuclear testing facility, and they tested everything, including fires involving nuclear weapons. So you can imagine a bunch of nukes in a room. They throw in, I don't know, kindling, paper, some old coffee cups, set the whole thing on fire and see what happens. And then when it's done, they got like puddles of plutonium lying around and stuff. And just really, really, really scary stuff. And back in the 1990s, when the Soviet Union collapsed, this stuff was just lying around. It really left the collapse of the Soviet Union left the Kazakhstan and everywhere else economically devastated. It was a disaster, and they couldn't afford to guard this stuff. And people were going into the facilities for scrap metal. So people were taking out material that might be highly radioactive and selling it in the scrap metal market. And then this American guy who used to be, I don't know, a top nuclear scientist or something in the government, went over there, made arrangements with the with the Kazakhstanis, and arranged for some Americans to come over. They had a team of scientists and engineers. They worked for 17 years, and they finally got all the plutonium cleared up, all the uranium cleared up, all the irradiated material, all the hot stuff done, and they've got it, and they made the site safe. Right? So you can take, there are some things that people do that are just insane, that make the world bad, like pretty much the Drug Enforcement Administration, or the FBI of the 1950s and 60s. And then there are people who do things right, who get stuff actually done and made the world safe. Right? But that's our first order logic, because we have this idea, we have a set of rules, right? We have axioms. We want to do this. We want to make the world safer, right? That's an axiom. This is ethics. You know ethics, study of right and wrong. Anyone had an ethics class? So ethics is also called axiology. Probably because it's a cool name. But axiology is the study of axioms, the study of stuff that is axiomatic. And an axiom is something that you sort of arbitrarily set. Right? It used to be in geometry classes, they'd start off with the axioms, and people would say, well, why are these the axioms? And the teacher would say, well, that they just are. These are the axioms we use. Other sets of axioms are possible. Now they don't say that anymore because they've got a bigger system of proof. But every system of proof has axioms. Arbitrary, fixed rules. And the question is, what justifies the axioms? So here's what I think is Nagel's point, that no matter what system of justification we have, right, we have, that where chains of justification come to an end in something we like, right? Hopefully, next week I will be looking back on an evening at the Drunken Mermaid Tavern and saying, well, that went pretty well, hopefully. There's all kinds of things that can go wrong. For a start, it's out in Joshua Tree. It's like a couple hundred miles away, I don't even know. I got my friend Connor driving up on his own. He's directionally challenged, so I don't know if he'll make it. And there's all kinds of things that can go wrong. But, it's a goal. But what justifies it as a goal? Why is this a goal to me? I mean, it wouldn't be a goal to most people. Why are your goals to you? Well, you have a set of axioms. You have certain things you value and don't value. Certain things you're going to put out effort for. Well, why are those the things you put out effort for? At a certain point, you sort of say, I don't know. Right? It's like that annoying child who's always asking why. Why? Because this. Why? Why that? Well, because of the other thing. Why that? Well, because of... And afterwards it's like, shut up. Gotta give someone the back of the hand. But, Nagel isn't in the room. I can't give him the back of my hand, so we cannot settle the problem that way. So, what justifies our axioms? It all comes to an end. Right? Okay, so I'm going to call this Nagel's absurdity. If I'm interpreting it right, I think that it is saying it is absurd, which means self-contradictory. It is self-contradictory to be deadly serious about something that itself is ultimately not justified. Okay, so that's sort of the technical, logical argument here. That no matter what we do for justification, ultimately we'll get to a point where we'll say no justification. Remember I said that logic was also called axiology? Part of the reason for that, not logic, ethics, the study of right and wrong. Now and I had a discussion at Saddleback about this, and I said, look, I'm a moral absolutist. I think that there's an absolute set of moral rules. I can't prove this, or at least I don't think I could easily prove it. If I was to go into a classroom and try to prove that there actually is an absolute morality. I believe morality is like mathematics, that some things are right and some things are wrong, and that that we can tell the difference. And what I say, but can I give an argument for this? No, I'd have to do some reading. I'd have to sit down. I'd have to do a lot of thinking and make a preparation. I'd probably take 2 lectures. I'd go on for hours each time. And at the end of it, nobody would be saying, by gosh, Dr. Young, I understand. Now I see that that morality is absolute and is real. I see morality is real too. I don't think anyone's going to say that. No matter how good I do, I don't think anyone's going to be convinced by any argument I can come up with that morality is a real thing. So when I talk about ethics, and I talk about the academic discipline of ethics, it's actually not approaching the concept, the question of whether ethics exists or not. That topic is dealt with in a class called meta-ethics. In an ethics class, ethics is studied on the assumption that ethics exists. So if I was teaching an ethics class, the first day I'd say, I'm not going to prove that ethics exists. What I'm going to do is assume that it exists, and then look at better and worse theories of how it works. Does that make sense as a distinction? Right, so if I was teaching an ethics class here, I would not really, maybe as an essay topic, but I would not in class deal with the question of does ethics exist at all. Rather it's, hey guys, we're going to assume that there really is a right and wrong, that it's not just a matter of feelings or an arbitrary thing where, what's right or wrong for me is whatever I happen to feel like or independently. We're going to assume it's a real thing and then apply logic to that concept. So there's that. We do ethics, we ultimately have no justification, or I have no justification, and maybe ethics ultimately has no justification at all. Okay. So there's a sort of Nagelian absurdity to ethics, that it's sort of hanging in midair. So any questions so far? Have I hammered that into the ground? Okay, so the second question is seriousness. Right. Because I can see a sense of absurdity. Right? I can see what Nagel is saying. Nagel is saying life is like being in the DEA. Particularly the part of the DEA that enforces laws against use of marijuana. If you study the effects of the drug and study the effects of prohibiting the drug, it becomes really clear that this is a dumb idea. People who smoke marijuana are very rarely a danger to society, and I've never heard of anyone being a danger to society because of their marijuana use. The idea that, at least not because of, the home use. I mean, if someone's operating heavy machinery while high as a kite, that would be a bad thing, right? Someone driving on the freeway high would be a bad thing. It would be a risk to people. But people smoking marijuana on a Friday night to relax, or even getting high every night, yes.
Pot smokers typically drive a lot slower than the.
So they're annoying rather than dangerous. That is the story about the pot smokers. So I remember seeing a TV program that profiled a DEA agent in Humboldt County who was organizing raids against pot farms. And these raids are dangerous because the people with the pot will fight, they'll kill to preserve the secrecy. There's this it's believed that some pot farmers have committed murders to maintain the secrecy of their farms. I mean, I'm never going to go. I'm not going to go hiking in Humboldt County, not unless I have I can take an AK-47 and back up. Or actually an MP5. But
isn't the issue with marijuana here that it can lead to worse?
that's a fantasy.
It's a fantasy.
That's a fantasy. It was just something they made up to justify the prohibition. So there's this DE agent, and she's deadly serious. And the entire program, I never saw her smile once. And her idea is intensely, we're going to bust these farmers, we're going to bust the dealers, we're going to bust people, we're going to investigate, we're going to prosecute, and we're going to do this, we're going to burn the crop, and we make sure nobody gets to stand downwind. And I'm looking at this woman, and you know how it is if you're in a hospital, there's that calm professionalism. You know, doctors, right? You have experience with doctors. Have you ever been in an emergency situation or had paramedics around, and they're focused and they're calm and they're businesslike, they don't waste any time, but they're not intense. They're calm, and they've got a bit of detachment. And this woman was hyper-focused. And she had sort of the attitude of, I'm looking there, and I'm not looking there or there. Have you ever had someone ignore you? Really seriously ignore you? You're trying to say something to them. No, the goat actually, your house actually is on fire. All right. Or whatever it is, and they focus on something else so that they don't have to listen to you. And she had that expression on her face pretty much all the time. That she was just going to do this, and she was not even going to hear any hint of criticism from these obvious pinkos who were following her around with the camera. And so that's someone who has a sort of intense over-seriousness while they're pursuing an absurd activity, an activity that contradicts any kind of stated goal that may be associated with it. So Nagel is saying we're like DEA, those kind of DEA agents. Obviously the DEA does some good stuff. I mean, crystal meth is a scourge. It's just horrible. And cocaine is the drug of lawyers and bankers and Wall Street traders. So, you know, I don't care about coke users. Nothing? You know, and heroin does seem to be pretty destructive, if Ewan McGregor's early work is to be believed. Do you guys ever see Trainspotting? You got to see Trainspotting. Seriously, dude, see Trainspotting. See a Jedi Knight in his early years. It's awesome. It's a horrible movie, but about horrible people doing horrible things. But hey, you know. So, but is that really serious? I mean, I'm talking about this person very focused, and I've been like that when I sort of at some level knew that I was doing something stupid. I felt myself ignoring people who were telling me, Martin, stop, don't do that, or, you know, that's something dumb, you did something dumb. So I try to get over that, right? But is this the right model of seriousness? What do you think? What is your model? Tell me, what's the model of a serious person, someone who you think is really serious about what they're doing? Is it the hyper-serious person? The hyper-focused person? No. Right. My model of seriousness is the emergency room doctor. I used to watch the show ER. It's like it's 10 years ago now, but they're very calm. They're very matter of fact. When something goes wrong, they might get angry for a second, but then they're right back to being calm again. Right? So, okay, here's a few questions. We're familiar with people who don't take anything seriously, right? You can't have a serious conversation with them, or at least they don't care about the stuff you care about. Right? Have you ever tried to have a conversation with someone who doesn't like the things you like, and then at a certain point you realize he's not really interesting, or someone who makes fun of your stuff? What about someone who gets angry all the time? I used to get angry all the time. What about someone who gets angry all the time about stuff they passionately care? Are they really taking it seriously? Right. I remember a story about a professor who was teaching an ethics class, and one of his topics was moral vegetarianism. Moral vegetarianism is the idea that we should not consume animal products. We shouldn't eat meat. We shouldn't wear leather shoes or use leather belts or anything like that, or even animal bone as decoration, because the meat industry imposes a great deal of suffering on animals. And he gave lectures on vegetarianism, the arguments for and against moral vegetarianism, and he did logical analysis all the way through. And at the end of the semester, he's telling this, he told the story that at the end of the semester, I think this was like he wrote a letter to an academic publication, and I read it in this publication. So I read his letter. In his letter he says, at the end of the semester, I asked the students, do you guys all understand the arguments for moral vegetarianism? And they all said, yeah, we understand them, Is there anyone who doesn't understand those arguments? No one put up their hand, they all understood the arguments. And he says, all right, and does anybody know any actual flaws in those arguments? Because we went over the criticisms. Right? Does anyone know of a good rebuttal argument to moral vegetarianism? And nobody put up their hands. Nobody knew of an argument. And so you're all vegetarians now, he said. How many of you have decided to become vegetarians? And the reason for the letter to this teacher's publication was that he was absolutely furious that none of his students put up their hands and said, I'm a vegetarian now, Professor, because of all the arguments you've given me. Can you guess what I thought when I was reading the letter? I thought it was a complete asshole. I thought that this was a letter from someone who fundamentally did not understand teaching, was not serious about teaching, and probably should not be in a classroom, because he's trying to impose his own views on the students. And it's one thing to make a case and to get people to understand the case, but at that point you drop it, because the students are supposed to disagree with you. And so that's my example of someone who's intense and very grim about what he does, and angry. Right? But he's not serious. He's not really taking it seriously, because if he was taking it seriously, he'd be trying to give people the intellectual tools to make up their minds for themselves, rather than trying to ballyrag them or bully them into agreeing with him. Does that make sense as an idea of seriousness?
So then would Nagel say it was absurd for him to think he can convert
Yeah,
them all into vegetarians?
yeah, and I think it actually is, clearly to me it's absurd to think that. I think that shows that he does not understand how education works, he doesn't understand how people make up their minds, and doesn't understand, I mean, students are people who generally tend to think for themselves, or at least to be independent, and attitudes are hard to change. If you want people to be moral vegetarians, set up a little table and hand out copies of animal liberation, give talks and things like that, and some people will change their minds, but to do it in a classroom, I think it was actually unethical. Right? If I did something like that, it would be unethical. So, if you ever see me do something like that, don't tell anyone. So there's an idea about seriousness. I have a saying: no one who lacks a sense of humor can possibly be said to be taking life seriously. I actually think humor is important. I think humor is an important value, and I think writers who use humor in their work actually generally tend to convey things at least as well as the writers who don't use humor. All right, so why do we work? There's two kinds of things, right? There's work for pay, and there's recreation. You've ever thought about people who are serious about recreation? You have some activity you do for recreation, and you make sure you budget time for it. And you go on and you do it. I'm serious about the pirate reenacting. I dress up as Admiral Henry Morgan of 1669, and I ponce around in a big cocked hat and talk to people, and we march around and stuff. Mainly I just hang around the camp and sneak drinks. But it's serious about it. Why do we do that? Now, so I want to ask, so very seriousness, is this kind of seriousness that I've been talking about, the professional seriousness of an emergency room doctor or a good lawyer or any good professional person, or anybody who's just focused on getting the job, the exact right job done in exact right way with the minimum of fuss and messing around, and we'll make a joke here and there as they go. Just have a good mood about it. Right? Think about when you're doing, like, washing the dishes. If you're serious about washing the dishes, would you manifest seriousness about washing the dishes? Would it be being really grim while you do it, or would it be making sure that every dish is perfectly clean? You don't have to be grim to do that. So, being serious is like seeing the humor in stuff when there is that. All right, so I want to ask you guys, is Nagel right about this? That there's this absurdity to life, and that it's a problem? Actually, two questions. Is it true? Would it matter? You familiar with the hymn "Amazing Grace"? You guys know the story of that hymn? It is one of the most moving things. It's a religious, right? It's a hymn. It's a religious song for a religious person. And the writer of the hymn was a slave ship captain. He was part of the triangle trade, and he would carry slaves from Africa to the Americas, where they would be sold into horrible lives. And many slaves, Africans, died on the voyage over. Many were killed in the process of gathering slaves on the other side before they were bought. So he participated in a horrible trade. And he did this for a number of years. But unlike most people who do horrible things, one day he said, you know what? This is horrible. This is a horribly evil thing. I am an evil person. I'm going to stop doing it and try to win redemption. And he gave up the slave trade, started doing better things. Right? Now, if morality is real, this was a good thing. If morality isn't real, this is, nothing. But since I believe morality is real, I believe it's a good thing that he gave up the slave trade and went off to do other things and try to make a better life and a better person out of himself. And he got religion, became a very religious person, prayed a lot, and did what religious people do. And at a certain point, he finally came to the conclusion that he was redeemed, that he had God's love and forgiveness. And he did not believe that he had earned this. He believed that he had been given this by God. And that's the term grace, right? Familiar with grace. And he was emotionally transformed by this and stunned by this grace of God, that God could have so much grace, could actually forgive someone who is so freaking horrible as he still thought he was. So it's amazing grace that can forgive a wretch like him. And so that's that thing. And I can imagine somebody, right, and it really mattered to him that what he'd been doing was horrible. And I can imagine, and there are, well, on the drug legalization movement, the people who want to legalize marijuana, a lot of them are ex-police officers who spent time in the trenches in the drug war, and it came out saying, well, this is stupid. This is not doing any good, it's doing harm, and it's not solving the real problems. And so it matters, at least to them, it mattered that they were doing the wrong thing, and it matters that they go on and do the right thing. So, but would this matter? All right. So, and I'm going to say it's not really true. I don't believe that it's really true that life is absurd in the way that Nagel thinks it's absurd. Because I think that as human beings, doing something is better than doing nothing. Have you ever had a day when you're stuck in, right? Or a day when you're supposed to do something with your friends, and your car's broken down, and you've just got to stay at home, and there's nothing on TV, and it's before the internet. I just realized that the internet, you cannot be bored anymore. There's no. I remember being in my house when I was a kid, having read absolutely every book I owned, and there's nothing on the 2 TV channels that we've got. And that's why I started reading Jane Austen, because that was the only book in the house. But you can imagine that, right? You can be stuck with nothing to do. Why not do something? I mean, We have these feelings, we do stuff. And suppose I'm stuck somewhere, I got a few minutes to kill, I pick out the paper and I do a Sudoku. And half the time I don't finish them, because half the time they're too difficult for me. But say I do one, was that pointless? Well, no, it filled a few minutes for me. That was the aim, was to fill a few minutes so that I wasn't bored out of my mind. And if I do it for a while and then quit, I've never regretted quitting a Sudoku. It's like, I might think, well, I'd like to get back and try to finish it. Oh, I don't have time, no problem. Think about Amazing Grace. If you can get that hymn up on YouTube and have someone really belting it out and feeling it. Right? That's when something matters. Stuff matters because we feel about it. Imagine I'm a robot and I have no emotions, and I look at this and Nagel says, you're serious about what you do, but it's absurd. And I'll say, I don't care about that, I don't have emotions. Right? There's a contradiction in Nagel. We're supposed to feel bad about this, but the reason that it's bad is because we're serious, that we have feelings. Well, if we have feelings, we do things for feelings, right? So, I really don't think it's true. I think the system of justification as a whole is its justification. We chose that system because we want something to do. And there's a big problem with figuring out what's the best thing to do. There's the ethics and stuff like that. But we choose this as something to do. We want to do stuff, we choose stuff to do. And Nagel might say, well, that in itself is absurd. And I'm going to say, okay, it's absurd. Can I go do something now? If life really is absurd, it really doesn't matter. At least it doesn't matter to me. Finding out that life is absurd in this way doesn't make me want to write Amazing Grace. It doesn't want me to quit the make me want to quit the DA. It doesn't make me want to get off the game, right? Imagine that you're doing something really that you just really enjoy doing, and someone says, but this is not making a difference in the world. Yeah? So? Okay, quit now and do